up dive. Feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you are joining me on this very nice spring evening up here in the Northwoods. And whether you're watching us live on Facebook or on X, or of course on YouTube, or watching it archived on any of those sites after the live o'clock Tuesday 9 p.m. time slot, I'm so grateful to have you here. Or maybe you're listening to the audio show after we've already recorded it on Tuesday night on any of the many platforms which it goes out on, along with all the other shows on the Untold Radio Network, which I also encourage you to listen to. Regardless, greetings. I'm delighted to have you here. What is going to be the wonderful ending to a wonderful day where I got to spend a lot of time outside with my daughter and enjoying this gorgeous weather. Whenever it hits here in the Northwoods after such a long winter, it always feels special. I'm from Sydney, Australia, so I've always taken that warmth for granted until I've lived here and lived in some brutal winters. So anyway, regardless, I'm delighted you're joining me tonight. I'm also delighted my guest is joining me tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation we're about to have. He's a prolific author. He's the author of several books, most recently Wisconsin for Kennedy, the primary that launched a president and changed the course of history, Year of Plenty, A Family Season of Grief, Go West Young Man, a father and son rediscover America on the Oregon Trail, which I know one of our regular listeners, Professor Horace Smith, or Emeritus Professor Horace Smith, is looking forward to hearing maybe a little bit about. So maybe we'll drift in the Oregon Trail for a couple of minutes just to placate you, Horace, because I know you're probably there listening. But what we're really going to be focusing on, the book that we're going to be spending most of the time on, is his wonderful Midwestern Strange, hunting monsters, Martians, and the weird in Flyover country, because I think that's probably the weirdest of all of his fantastic books. He also has a film partner, Steve Dayton, who I've actually played some of Steve's films at Midwest Weird Fest, which is a festival I run in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is also where I originally met tonight's author because he's Eau Claire based. He's also the recipient of the Truman Capote Prize for Literary Nonfiction, the Ann B. and James B. McMillan Prize, the Council of Wisconsin Writers Blei-Derleth Award, the Society of Midland Authors Award, and he received a 2022 silver medal from the Midwest Book Awards. His work has been featured on C-SPAN, LitHub, Washington Post, Inside Edition, Star-Tribune, The Millions, and a Wisconsin Life. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to Talking Weird, BJ Hollars. Greetings, BJ.
Hey, Dean. Thanks so much for having me.
And it's so great. I'm guessing you had a nice day in Eau Claire too. You're not too far from me.
So pretty. It was hard to be inside for a minute of it, but yes, every second we were outside, it was good.
No, it's fantastic. And that, of course, as I was saying, is where we met originally. We met at Midwest Weird Fest. You were you were gracious to come along and hang out, and it was wonderful to meet you there with Steve.
Thank you. We have so much fun every year. Steve and I try to go for at least a day or at least a night. We just have such a blast. I remember I had this vivid memory. We went right before COVID, and it was like the last thing we did before COVID. So we were really glad we got that one in the special.
Did you see Hellier? Were you there for Hellier that year? When the Newkirks came in, or Greg Newkirk and Carl Pfeiffer?
I don't think so. Gosh, it's been so long now. I don't remember. I just remember there was an after party, and we went to this after party across the street, and then that was the last conversation I had with humans in person for like a year. So we really enjoyed ourselves.
Yeah, it had to kind of tide us along socially for quite some time after what dropped down afterwards. Anyway, I adored your book, Midwestern Strange. I think our audience would love it too. Maybe before we even get into it, and I'll get you to remind them at the end, but where can we get a hold of this book?
Yeah, sure. Everywhere books are sold. bjhollars.com is my website, but it can be purchased online at all the places and some of the bookstores as well. So yeah, anywhere you like.
People should get it. It's fantastic. Your background, it's clear you have a great interest in the weird, but your background isn't somebody who's a cryptozoologist or a ufologist or somebody who's written multiple books on the weird. This is really your first book, I believe, on the weird. Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this type of anomalous phenomena and strange stories?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. As I was writing this book, I spent a lot of time kind of reflecting on that, and I think my own origin story probably began where a lot of our origin stories do in this subject, local library. I remember vividly being in the nonfiction section and seeing a book on like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot in the nonfiction section. And so as as a 9-year-old, you're thinking, this must be real. It's nonfiction. And so from there, I just kind of spiraled. There's a moment when I was 12 years old in 1996, Independence Day just come out in theaters. I saw that movie 5 times in the theaters. But I remember there was a crop circle right up the road. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. This crop circle was in Paulding, Ohio. My brother and I were like obsessed with this stuff. We were watching a lot of X-Files. We made my mother drive across state lines to take us to this crop circle, So there's this silly photo of the two of us like posing before the crop circle. And I recently came across that and realized this was kind of the beginning for me. I always loved the weird stuff from the library days. I loved reading Goosebump books as a kid. I was the founder of the fan club here in Indiana where I grew up. And I think it was kind of the reading and then the specials and the TV shows. And then of course, seeing it for myself in that crop circle that really kind of started me down this path.
Is Paulding, is that where the Paulding light is as well? Is that
Oh my gosh, is that right? I'd never made that connection. It could be. It's Paulding, Ohio. I don't know. We got to do a search on that because that's a big thing.
That is a big thing. My girlfriend Samantha's actually watching. I think he's talked about the Paulding light. Put a message in the chat if Paulding, Ohio is where the Paulding light is, if you know, sweetie. No, I think it's interesting. I know when I was a kid, it was books too that really drew me to the paranormal, and I very much like you would borrow everything I could from the library, and I would always want books on the weird and the unusual, and that accompanied with TV shows I think framed my initial interest into these things. So that kind of sets up your backstory as far as your interest in this stuff as a kid. But then when you're already this established writer and a professor of English and this kind of respectable member of the literati, really, what drove you to go, I'm going to return to this childhood passion of the weird?
Well, it was kind of a risky move, like professors are not you're supposed to stay in your lane. You're supposed to do your little thing. But for me, it's like, I worry that if you get too siloed into any single topic, your readership's also going to be pretty siloed. So if you look at all the books I write, they're all over the place. I always joke I'm like the poster child of the liberal arts education. Like if it scares me, if it keeps me up at night, that's what I want to write about. And so there were a couple instances that really got me back into the weird. One was kind of the whole fake news thing. I wrote this in 2017, 18, came out in 19. And so there was a lot going on in that world. And I was just so curious why we believe whatever is in front of us sometimes. And so I thought if we could kind of like think of that through the lens of some of the stranger phenomenon in our world, maybe we could have a better understanding of why we were so susceptible to more real life concerns. And so that was part of it. I was teaching at the University of Alabama. I was a grad student. And there was this moment where I asked my students to write like their 5th persuasive essay of the term. They were so sick of this. And I finally said, look, I'll write one too. Pick a topic. I will persuade you of whatever you decide. And this kid in the back of the room, he had this like hood on. He like never talked all term. He finally like got all smug and he raised his hand. He said, prove Bigfoot. And so I thought, uh-oh. And so I went to the library, got all the books. I was looking at great apes. I was looking at these lost species of apes found 40 miles off the nearest road in Congo. I kind of created this whole essay called In Defense of Sasquatch, just trying to find a way to prove that Bigfoot may not exist. So it wasn't like a strong defense necessarily, but just to kind of use some rhetorical moves and some research to kind of look deeper into that. And as I was doing that, I realized how much I really value this idea of like trying to validate things that are difficult, and kind of like giving time and space to uncertainty. And I think we're so quick just to like roll our eyes at things or to be dismissive of people whose ideas don't fit our own. And so I think looking at weird phenomena is a chance for us to be a little more empathetic. And even if we don't believe what people are saying or say be seen, we can still be kind to them. There's this phrase, someone says, empathy is not endorsement. And I really like that. I think it really applies to the weird, but also stuff well beyond the weird. Empathy is not endorsement. So I kind of kept that running through my head as I was writing this book and interviewing all these folks.
It's a very fair and balanced book. It doesn't have that sense of the debunker in there. I mean, obviously you approach a lot of these things skeptically, but skeptically in a healthy way, which is what skepticism should be. You're never just dismissive of these people. You listen to their stories and you clearly have a very strong interest in wanting to, hear the stories and perhaps potentially get to the bottom of it. Although we can talk about perhaps the difficulties of getting the bottom of any of this stuff as we move along. So maybe because it's called Midwestern Strange, and you're from the Midwest, and well, at least you're based in the Midwest, so I'm guessing you're from here originally.
Oh, yeah.
Was that the driving force that made you decide I'm going to focus on the Midwest? Or
yeah, I think that's a great question. Again, I think part of it is we're not the coasts. The Midwest is literally flyover country. We're the place that you go across from one plane stop to the other. And so I was growing up, I saw the richness of this place. Today, I see the richness of this place. And I just, growing up looking at the books just like you did, looking at the Time Life books, looking at the ancient pyramids and this and Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, I really want to dig deeper in what was in my own backyard, like literally in the Midwest. And it didn't take a lot of work to find, 9 case files from across the Midwest, some of which are sort of familiar. I think Mothman's probably the most famous, but also some that are kind of under the radar. There's this Beast of Busco. That was kind of my hometown monster. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But the Kensington Runestone up the road from where I am now, and this weird military experiment called Project Elf, which is kind of rumor and kind of talked about quietly around these parts for a long time, and weather defense and all these weird connections, So for me, it was a matter of like giving some props to the Midwest. We can be as weird as anyone. And as the book likes to talk about, if cities embrace their strange, if they say, yes, we are home to this monster, oftentimes it really helps them economically, it helps them culturally. And so I sort of like the sociological side of things too. A lot of these towns were or are dying. And one way to save them was to have a great story and to perpetuate a legend and find one more reason to bring people to town.
Well, that's certainly the case with exactly you just mentioned Mothman. I mean, think of the boom of the Mothman Festival. Today is a classic example. Hodag Festival. In fact, maybe this would be a fun little one just to jump into a little, because it's Hodag Festival next weekend, like coming Saturday, 17th of May. Not that we have 2 Hodag festivals here, because we have one which is a country and western music festival. So people get confused when you go, I want to go to Hodag. Oh, you're going to go to see, Travis Strait, or I don't know, name a country. Just inventing a country name. But maybe that's one which I think is well known in Wisconsin, but the Hodag I think is less well known outside of the state. So
And
maybe
I'd never heard of him before I got here either, And so everyone, as soon as they got to know my interest in and weird stuff, it didn't take long before people said, you got to investigate the Hodag, and they were right. So for those at home who aren't familiar with the Hodag, it's a very curious story. It was kind of started in the 1890s. A guy named Gene Shepherd, who was kind of a town booster, but also like a lumber guy. He went into the woods. He was a sawyer. He could take lumber companies to the best lumber in the whole woods, and they would chop them down and make a ton of money. So he made a lot of money doing this, but his heart was really trying to boost and build the city of Rhinelander, Wisconsin. And so one way he did that was they were having the Oneida County Fair coming up in 1892, 93, somewhere in there. And he thought, what this town really needs is a monster. And so there's this kind of famous picture. You can Google it right now. It's, Hodag, Hodag. And there's this photograph that ran in the papers all around town of all these men kind of dressed in with their guns and looking very like stoic in their heroism surrounding this Hodag creature, which is very clearly a wood carved like creature. It's described in so many ways, part rhinoceros, part hippo. It eats white bulldogs on Sundays. It's kind of this like impossible to peg down creature. But if you go to Rhinelander today, there is literally a 30-foot incredible fiberglass statue right outside their Chamber of Commerce. Like, people are always getting selfies with it. You actually go into town, they have Hodag poop you can buy at the local candy store, and there's a Hodag tire and lube, and you can go to the Hodag store and like buy all the Hodag paraphernalia you want. So this whole idea of a creature that roamed the North Woods, there it is right there. It's perpetuated for over a century, well over a century now. And the fact that this is still, when things were tough and the paper mill was closing down in Rhinelander, they kind of doubled down on their creature. And today there are festivals, there's money coming in all the time, tourism dollars. And what I love about it is there's this kind of conspiracy of silence. So if you go to Rhinelander and you're an outsider, like, oh, have you guys seen the Hodag lately? Like 9 times out of 10, they're like, oh yeah, just last week we saw it over in the woods over there, and maybe you should buy some of this Hodag Beanie Baby we have for sale, So it's clearly a means to raise a little money, make a little money for the town and its people. But hey, you gotta appreciate people who can keep their lips that quiet and do it for the good of the community,
Indeed. You mentioned in the book something which I found interesting, is that there are stories that the case files, as they're listed in as the book, there are those you can kind of sink your teeth into, at least on some level. Like there's the Hodag, there's that Norse runestone story, which we might touch on. There's the Elf Project that you mentioned before. But then there are ones which are far more amorphous, the Beast of Bray Road, the Joe Simonton pancake story, which we'll probably get to.
Yeah.
All of these type of things. Were you conscious when you were putting it together? And because you said you quickly became aware of how much weird there was. Were you choosing files which kind of fit different, I suppose, tropes or different types? Like, how did you put them together? How did you choose those case files?
That's a great question also. So the book is broken down into 3 parts. We've got our monsters, which is part 1, and that kind of speaks to the Beast of Bray Road you mentioned, this Oscar the Turtle, giant turtle business in Indiana, and then the Mothman. So that's the first third of the book, are the monsters. And I guess where my heart is, I love cryptids. I love the monsters. I love imagining these things roaming the woods and the waters in the North Woods and in the Midwest more broadly. Part 2 is Martians. So this is, sticking with the M alliteration. This is more of the UFO stuff. So there are 3 stories there. The Joe Simonton Space Pancakes, one of my favorites. It's kind of comical, but also kind of just bizarre, and people can't stop talking about it. The second one is this Minot Air Force Base sighting, which is pretty serious and kind of strange. Then the third one is another one of my favorites, the Val Johnson incident. We'll talk more about this, I hope, but it's an incredible story. And the most interesting part of that story is this guy has a top 10 UFO sighting, and he lives in Eau Claire. And so people have been trying to find this guy for years. He was off the grid, and I just got in touch with him. I said, we're pretty much neighbors, and he was willing to talk to me when he wasn't talking to anyone else. So that was very exciting. And then to answer your question, the third of the book is the weird itself. And so that's when we get to the Kensington Runestone, and we get to Project Elf, which is more of a military thing, and then the Hodag, which we just spoke of. So the Hodag might have fit into monsters, but since we know the Hodag is not real, spoiler alert, it kind of fit into the weird because it's taken on a life of its own, and really, I think, embodies this whole community-driven spirit of embracing the strange and making a buck while doing it.
We'll transition to Val Johnson in a minute, because I would like to talk to you about that, because it's a story I'm less aware of, and I'm sure most of our audience are hardly aware of it at all. And it's fantastic that you were able to track that down and work and have it. So, because I don't think there's ever been any coverage of it like you've got in your book.
Not this in depth. I was so fortunate. I got lucky on that one. Yeah.
But just before we go there, we have a question or a point from Horace Smith, who again is Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University. He's been on the show. He's a good friend of the show. And he said this is in reference to something you were mentioning earlier, and I was mentioning about the success of things like the Hodag Festival and the Mothman Festival, and I suppose small towns taking advantage of the anomalous tales or the weird cryptid or whatever's associated with the region. And he asked, should we worry, however, about legends promoted just for economic purposes?
Great question. Oh, well, thank you so much, Professor Smith. That's a fantastic question. And I guess I think in terms of like what it could do to folklore, the watering down of these stories, I mean, that is problematic, no doubt about it. I guess where I'm coming from and kind of pitching this theory is more having spent time in these small towns and seeing these people and recognizing the difficulty they have of sometimes making a buck and surviving economically when the main employer shuts down. For them, they turn to stories. And so I just, as a storyteller myself, I just love that for once, the creative economy is what's driving the comeback. It's not when you run out of trees, what do? And who would have thought it would have been a story about a Hodag that would help people come to town and spend some money? So, I mean, directly, I couldn't agree more. I think there is something very problematic about just trying to milking the beast for the money. But if it's not hurting too many people, if this beast is, let's say, the Hodag and very much folklore in fashion, doesn't hinder the truth necessarily, I guess I'm willing to give them some allowances if it helps send those kids to college, helps put some food on the table. But I would worry in larger context if larger corporations were getting in here and really exploiting it to the degree where it wasn't about the town anymore, but about the buck that can be sent beyond the town. I think that for me is maybe the line I'm drawing.
No, I agree with you. To me, and plus they're fun. You know what I mean? Like the fact that these events exist and people are so interested in the weird and the anomalous, and the draw to have something like that locally that you can go to, or maybe even pull, people in. I was at the Jersey Devil Film Fest last year because I had my Shaver Mystery short in there, and that was a whole lot of fun. They got people dressed up as the Jersey Devil, and it's just one of those one of the happiest moments of my life was wandering around in that festival. It was a whole lot of fun, and so I think, regardless of the reality, and perhaps people, I don't think there's a problem, like you said, of monetization of it. I think there's a problem if the story is dissipated. In fact, it's funny, just a very quick side story. I think you probably know, BJ, I'm making, as everybody watches this show, I'm making a documentary about Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver, and they were based in Amherst, Wisconsin. And I would love it if I could encourage, and I've talked to some business owners and people like that in Amherst, like there should be a man who invented flying saucers festival in Amherst.
Absolutely.
Or a shaver festival in Amherst. Like it's just this little town, gorgeous little town. But the thing it should be most famous for, nobody even talks about really in the town. And so I like it. To me, it's a celebration of local culture and local legends. That's how I look at these festivals. It's celebrating something which is a regional, unique little tale or unique string of stories and experiences. So anyway, I'm all in favor of these kind of things.
Well, I mean, if we're not celebrating, it goes away too. My hometown is Fort Wayne, Indiana, so we didn't have a monster per se, but we did have Johnny Appleseed buried right up the road there. And so we had the Johnny Appleseed Festival, and I love asking my students. I actually teach a class on Midwestern strange, so we talk about these case files all the time. It's so fun. But I always ask them, like, what is your niche in your hometown? Like, what's the festival? What's the thing that draws people there? And so many of these folks from small town Wisconsin say nothing. But so many others have something, so I really encourage these towns to find something, make it up if you have to, and if you do it in the right style, with the right jest and the right kind of good humor, it's probably going to be beneficial to someone in some way. Thanks.
Totally agree. Now let's segue back to the Val Johnson story, because there's not one. I think I'm pretty well versed in UFO lore, but it's not a story I was really familiar with, and I'm sure most of our audience won't be either. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. This is, again, I just lucked out. So for those who aren't familiar, it occurred on August 27th, 1979. Val Johnson is a state trooper, or deputy rather, in Oslo, Minnesota, very small town. He has a line of like, you could stand on a step ladder and look both ways and see Monday and Wednesday. Like, there's nothing out here. It is a desolate place. He didn't stop for much of anything. There wasn't like traffic stops. He had a key to the gas station. He'd help himself to the gas station, fill up his car, leave some money. It was that kind of place, you know. But one night, late 1, 2, 3 in the morning, I'm forgetting the exact time, he's driving his Ford LTD Cruiser, and he sees this strange light in the sky. And so the light's kind of coming closer. It's kind of orb-like in a lot of ways, and it crashes into his windshield, and he blacks out. So he kind of comes to like 14 or so minutes later, and you actually online, you can find the actual call he made to dispatch saying, I've been hit by something. He sounds very disoriented. And what's so unique about this story is that it's one of the few UFO incidents, and that's why it's often, Jerome Clark calls it a top 10 case. There's so much physical evidence left behind. So Val Johnson had burns around his eyes. His cruiser had like, the glass was like bent and kind of like spider web shattered, but not completely shattered. The antennas were bent in very strange ways. And the oddest part is that there were like 14 lost minutes, both on his wristwatch and the dash clock. So you put all this together and you're like, what on earth happened here? A ball of light hit this cruiser. It didn't break it, but it had some kind of electrical charge to it. The minutes are gone. He's blacked out. He's got physical damage. And it became this very curious thing. But what's even more curious to me is how Val Johnson kind of became the spokesperson for this. And I love Val because he doesn't really want to talk about this stuff. He wasn't asking for this publicity. I guess he made like $1,000 once for having like the most unique sighting that year, but he wasn't trying to make money. He didn't want the fame or fortune. You can find one clip on YouTube, I think, of him on some like 1970s era talk show. He looks very stiff. He's very nervous, kind of talking through what he saw. But when I talked to him, what he shared with me is that for years, people who'd experienced strange phenomenon, anomalies, they'd show up at his house completely unannounced and be like, Val, I had this experience. I need to tell someone. I think you would be the one. And so God bless Val Johnson. He would like take them to his picnic table. He'd pour him some lemonade, and he just listened to these people. And so he became this pilgrimage for people to just like share their experiences. While Val himself will be the first to tell you, I have no idea what I saw that day, you know? And so that's what I love. And that's what I found about to be true with all the interviewees. If people wanted to be interviewed, like if they were excited about it, I was less excited about it because it kind of felt like there was a bit of a 15 minutes of fame thing happening there. But when I really had to work to kind of encourage someone to trust me, to earn that trust, to build that trust, those were the most fruitful interviews time and time again. And so, as I mentioned with Val, I just lucked out. I found out he lived a couple miles from me. We met at Perkins. This is also a funny side story. Every time I met a UFO related person, I kid you not, in 2 different states, they always wanted to meet at Perkins. I don't know. That was almost stranger than the UFO stuff. I have no idea what's going on with Perkins, maybe a discount card. But we met at Perkins several times and told these stories, and he was just really gracious to share those with me.
That's fantastic. I love Perkins.
Me too.
Because you know I've been here for over a decade now, but I'm still a recent transplant, so it's such a quintessential to me American diner. I don't know how Americans feel about it, but maybe let's stay on UFOs for a minute, because I think one of the weirdest UFO stories, which has a degree of, I suppose, people who are aware of it, although it's not like, you know, a Betty and Barney Hill case, or
Right.
it's not like, you know, a swamp gas, you know, case in Michigan, or one of those type of iconic cases that is in all of the histories. But I mean, I think it's an equally important case. It's just a little less well known. Is the Joe Simonton, or the Joe Simonton? I think your pronunciation is probably correct.
I don't know.
No, I think you are right. And I think that's something worth because again, that might be something more people are more aware about in these parts, because it's not that far from either of you. It's Eagle River, right? This happened.
Eagle River, right up the road. Yeah, and this was a great one. It's truly one of my favorites. And there's a lot more publicity on it now, but I found some really curious things when I was digging around with this one. So, in short, this story took place on April 18th, 1961. Joe, I'm going to say Simonton because I always say Simonton. A man is, you know, late 50s, early 60s. I think he's 6 years old, in fact, living in kind of rural Eagle River, not too far from Rhinelander, not too far from the Hodag story. And he's sitting there at 11 o'clock one morning doing his dishes, and he looks out his window and he sees a UFO just kind of laying next to his pine trees in the backyard. So Joe, and you can watch a couple of videos of him on YouTube. When I show my students, they're like, he's like everyone's grandpa. He's kind of casually waltzes out there to the UFO. How y'all doing? The hatch opens, and he says there an Italian-looking man I don't know what that means. Italian looking man gets out, a little smaller than him. He's wearing all black, and he kind of motions that he needs water for whatever reason. So Joe Simonton says, I wanted to be a good neighbor, so I went out and I got some water for the guy, gives it to him, and then he goes and looks inside the craft, and it looks like these Italian looking extraterrestrials are making pancakes. That's curious. So that's happening. And then at the end of that, as a thank you for giving them the water, allegedly they gave him a couple of these very small space pancakes. Gets weirder. So, I mean, this became quite a deal. We had people coming in to research this. The Air Force got involved. They did all this testing. And my favorite finding of the whole book, maybe, was that the Food and Drug Administration took one of these space pancakes and they did all these tests on it. And they determined that these pancakes were of terrestrial origin. So they were terrestrial origin. So nothing in the pancake was from out of this world. It was a lot of theories on what actually happened. Some say it was a hallucination. It should be pointed out that Joe himself was making pancakes that morning. But it's a really curious story. Another kind of funny thing about the story I like to share is there's like a $1 pamphlet he was selling about his experience. And literally the first page of this pamphlet, like 1/6 of the whole thing is like, there's been a lot of rumors and speculation. I just want to set one thing straight. And you think he would talk about like the sighting. No, he says, it has been reported that I am a chicken farmer, and I am in fact not a chicken farmer. I simply have chickens. This was very important to him. So it's just like an interesting character. But the story has lived on, and we spent some time in Eagle River. I actually visited the home where it happened. This was also weird. So I'm with my son, and there's a guy outside painting his barn, and this is the actual property. I didn't want to like freak him out. So I said, hey, sir, I'm working on this book. A rather interesting story occurred on your property. I don't know if you'd like me to share that with you. I didn't want to like throw this at him if he didn't want it. And he kind of turned around and looked at me and he goes, no, thanks. So that was that. He just didn't have any interest in what had happened on his property. Very strange encounter, but hey, probably the least strange thing that happened on that property. So
Yeah, it's weird when you go to properties. I only know this because I've been making the Palmer and the Shaver documentary, the man who invented flying saucers, for a while now, and the people who own Richard Shaver's old property in Lanark/Amherst, Wisconsin, don't want me to film there. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's no, there's all these weird little histories which are so vital perhaps to some of the stories, but at the same time it's some people just have zero interest, I guess. I kind of understand it. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not somebody who's into the weird or the strange, do you really want to be remembered as the person who is living in the property that this is the most significant thing of the Joe Simonton thing? So, how do you pronounce it?
I say Simonton, but again,
Simonton.
I haven't
That's probably correct. The Joe Simonton thing, though, is fascinating because to me, even though the tests came back, as you said, and there didn't seem to be anything out of this world, well, perhaps there wouldn't be if people from people from elsewhere had made this with ingredients from our planet. Do you know what I mean? Conceivably, not that I really think ETs are visiting this planet, as anybody who watches this show is probably aware of. I think it's far stranger than that. Is that those stories that are super weird, when nobody has anything to benefit by telling a super weird story, to me, those stories should be paid extra special attention to. And ironically, Raymond Palmer said the exact same thing in an interview with Gene Steinberg way back in the day, when Gene Steinberg visited Ray Palmer at his house in Amherst, Wisconsin. Gene Steinberg's the host of the Paracast, which is one of my favorite podcasts ever, gold standard of paranormal radio. And it's true, it's a great show. But in that interview in the old Caveat Emptor magazine, Palmer essentially says his secret of knowing when a UFO report is definitely true is when there's a very weird component to that story, like it.
Mm.
And John Keel said similar things, who
Mhm,
appears
mhm.
a number of times in your book. And I'm going to ask you about that in a second as well. But I have to put Flat Rockland's comment up, who's a regular viewer and regular listener. And this is a question for you. So he says, Tim Renner asks all of his guests on Tim Renner's show, do you eat the pancake? Would you have eaten that pancake, BJ?
Well, the way he talks about it because he kind of like took a bite and said it tasted like cardboard, but the rest he gave to the Air Force. I don't think I would. I feel like science would want me to do a little something else. Fun fact: I did come across this galaxy pancake mix when I was doing this book, and I was like, so now we are
Wow.
literally making space pancakes. So someone's eating the pancakes, but I don't think I think I would pass on that particular pancake. Yeah, good question.
Probably wise, because it always makes me think of fairy faith or fairy lore, which I'm obsessed with. Again, as
Oh,
anybody who
cool.
watches the show or listens to the show regularly knows, is that there's a warning in traditional fairy faith and fairy lore from Ireland is that you never should eat the food of the fair folk,
Fair.
because
Forgetting about that.
that might be the permission door that lets them keep you forever and you become trapped in the
Why risk it? You know.
absolutely, absolutely, man. You're fun to talk. I should have you on every second week, BJ. Um, let's slide into some other stories in the book.
Sure.
When I first moved to Wisconsin very early on, and this is probably the reason Midwest Weird Fest is called Midwest Weird Fest and even exists, is I picked up a book when I was in Wisconsin Dells. You might even know the name of the place. I
Mhm.
forget what it is, but there's a place with a Paul Bunyan statue outside. It's like a
Oh,
pancake.
flapjacks or something like that. One of
Yeah,
those.
like some
Yeah.
breakfast, Paul Bunyan's breakfast,
Yes. Yes.
rest.
That's
I
the
don't even
one.
know what it's
Logging
called, right?
camp. Yeah. Yeah.
But they have a tourist trap, bookstore in there. So I'm there. I'm very early living in Wisconsin, and I see a book called Weird Wisconsin by Linda
Mhm.
Godfrey.
Yes.
And I don't know at the time that there's a whole weird US series. So there's a weird Texas and a weird Minnesota and a weird California and probably every state in the union. I just start reading this book and go, this is the weirdest place. I'm living like literally in Weirdsville, USA. So it really inspired me to think that I was in the weirdest place on the planet. Anyway, Linda Godfrey is an incredible influence on myself, and I think on many people who have been attracted to the strange and the
Mhm.
unusual. And her
Mhm.
influence is felt in your book as well, particularly in your Beast of Bray Road chapter, where you investigate. I mean, what a wonderful experience that must have been, where you investigate Bray Road with Linda. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
It was incredible. And I mean, to your point, I remember the minute I moved to Wisconsin, the first book I bought was Weird Wisconsin because it's so ripe. I knew there's got to be a million writing opportunities in this book, and sure enough. And so, yeah, Linda was great. She just passed away a year or so ago. Rest her soul. It was so kind just to take me in. It was really just an email. Hi, Linda. You don't know me at all, but if you have some time, and she was so gracious. And I'm sure people request this from her all the time. So yeah, we went out. We spent the day together in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. And it was a really cool day. We took went down all the roads. Of course, she had her little camera, and of course the batteries ran out. So the batteries always run out when you're about to see something. We had a great time. We really just talked about what it meant to be an interviewer and how do you trust these people when you're trying to document something as strange as, let's say, a bipedal werewolf like the Beast on Bray Road, which she spent a significant amount of her life becoming the world expert on. What I love about Linda Godfrey's story, she wasn't asking for this. Like, she was doing cartoons with a local paper. The story kind of fell on her desk. She followed it up. She wrote some things about it, and then became this expert on Monster Quest and everywhere else. So it's just so cool how much your life can change as a result of a sighting of some kind. What I also liked about her is she talked about every time she interviewed someone, she always tried to interview them in person because if someone's going to lie, it's easier to get the tells when you're in the same room with them than when you're on the phone or you're across the Zoom or something. And so I always took that piece of advice to heart, which is why I always met someone at a diner or a cafe or in their home. I wanted to be face to face. And something else she said, which really stuck to me, is she said, I try to be as open minded as possible without my brain falling out the back of my head. And I just love that. The idea of being very open minded to the possibility. Again, that phrase, empathy is not endorsement, comes to mind. But when it came to writing about these people, Linda and everyone else, especially folks who had firsthand account sightings to share, I kind of made it my policy like, if I'm going to throw anyone under the bus, it's going to be me. I'd rather the professor get hit for being a little too open to things than these people who in good faith are trying to share what they believe to be true. It just does not seem ethically right to me to talk to these people, to hear these people, and then go ahead and make them look like a bunch of idiots or something. That was not what was happening here. So I really wanted to approach every interview with respect. I often shared pieces of the interview to make sure I got my facts right. And Linda, most of all, was just a huge kind of mentor at the start of this book when I was really trying to figure it out. The second stop I did that, Jay, in Elkhorn, I spent the morning with her. In the afternoon, there's an animal care like sanctuary. I forget what it's called. It's right up the road in Devlin, I think, Wisconsin. And they have one Thai liger. There's only 8 in the world, but it's a mix of a tiger with a liger. I guess so. It's called a Thai liger. So that was crazy. But I interviewed people about the wolves there, and I said, "Is there any way your wolves could ever stand on 2 legs?" Just kind of getting some research, and they were very clear under those circumstances. So we didn't solve the what happened with the beast on Bray Road, but Linda helped me get a little closer.
Linda Godfrey was one of the sweetest people I've met in my life. We had her at Midwest Weird Fest. We did the world premiere of her feature film debut, Return to Wildcat Mountain, which she directed with her son. And it was very special to have her there. And multiple people who were the actual interviewed witnesses came in about Black Panther sightings. In I think, is it the Driftless area or the Kettle Moraine? I get them all confused. Anyway, in one of those hilly mountainous areas of Wisconsin. But Linda Godfrey is, I hope she will be remembered going forward as one of the most important and giving and loving researchers in this space. This is a question I'm just curious about as an interviewer myself. When you were talking to people, were there people that you bumped into who you thought weren't necessarily being on the level with you? And did you possibly exclude them from the story, or you'd already pre-vetted people that you thought were problematic? Or
That's a great question. And I think what happened, I think it was a pre-vetting. I reached out to a lot of people. And pretty much everyone I found a name in a newspaper report, I highlight, I try to track them down. I do some preliminary interviews. And again, some people are just trying to be helpful. So you don't want to write them off. But it was always the people like Val Johnson and folks who were like, a little leery. I mean, I don't know, what are the rules here? Will you share the work? And those were the people who had something you really needed to share and probably hadn't told it a million times before. And so there's a lot of trust that goes into negotiating that relationship. And that was something I took very seriously. I think I kind of started understanding this years before. I just remembering this now. When I was in graduate school, I went to the East Coast Bigfoot Conference to do some research in Jeanette, Pennsylvania. It was the weirdest thing. I had like hitchhike half the way. It was just a crazy time. I slept on a motel room floor with dudes I'd never met before who were there for the conference. Like I was just doing something cheap, But it was a really curious experience to see like what it was like to just go into a place where you were not a part of that community and like respect it. What was so surprising to me is I was certain this was going to be like a bunch of yahoos, like just selling paraphernalia and all this stuff. It was the opposite. This was one of the most scientific conferences I've ever been a part of. Like no one was even saying like with certainty that Bigfoot is real. They were saying, well, the evidence proves, or from what I'm seeing in this chart. I mean, like it was just incredible how they were very reserved and very scientific. There was one guy, this is a kind of funny story. I remember in my mind, he had a briefcase handcuffed to him, like the nuclear codes. Maybe there was no handcuff. That could just be in my head. But he allegedly had proof of Bigfoot in this literal briefcase. So he'd walk around with this briefcase the whole conference. Sunday afternoon, everyone's leaving. I just had to ask. I was like, sir, I heard you have proof in that briefcase. I just got to ask if I can see it. And he kind of looked around. He clicked, he opened it, took out this photo. And it's what we refer to as a blob squash. Like this could have been anything. It was just a blurry blob, but he was so sure, But everyone else at that conference was like, again, very skeptical about the whole thing. And so that was the moment I learned sometimes people don't know what to make of the things they've seen or experienced, but that doesn't mean these should be written off, So that was a really formative experience, I think.
I think that's great. There is a sincerity, I think, amongst most people who are interested in the weird and in this space. Clearly there's charlatans, but there's charlatans who are used car salesmen, and there are charlatans who are like in the advertising industry, and there are charlatans all over the place. But I certainly know when I did my PhD research trip way back in 1999, when I came to the US, when I still lived in Australia and was doing my thing on UFO belief, I think my BS meter is pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. I think most of the people I talked to were fairly sincere. A lot of them were completely 125% sincere.
Yeah.
And I I still value so many of those relationships with people I met. Many of those I'm not in contact with anymore. Some of those I still do speak to regularly, and I don't think that any of them were just in it for financial gain. Or certainly, well, some people might want to sell books or something because that's the space that they're in, but I don't
Sure.
think they're necessarily being deceitful any more than a good car salesman is being deceitful when he wants
Right.
to sell you something which is good, right? Like
Right.
there's going to be sometimes there's going to be moneyed interest, but that doesn't mean that the person is insincere or any more than it means anybody who's selling you a how-to book on birding or a how-to book on planting your garden or a novel is insincere. I mean, it's just the space. It's the space that they're in. So it's strange, and I think that you approach these people very fairly in your book. Like if I was somebody who was in the community who was pushing, a certain narrative, I would hope that somebody like you would come knocking on my door to ask the questions.
That's very kind, and I love hearing about your experience. That's really curious. So, did you spend like a year just interviewing folks and kind of getting their take on things?
Well, I would love to say it was a year. Now, of course, I've been spending like almost 3 years doing the Ray Palmer, Richard Shaver documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers. But I was based in Australia. I was at the University of Sydney doing my PhD on American UFO belief. So while I could obviously, and I was in the history department, so most of it was the history of it, obviously. So most of that is looking at, I suppose, primary sources and some secondary sources, but I was also very conscious that I needed to interject myself into what was happening, around the millennium. It was like 99 that I went there. So I probably spent, I don't know, a couple months, a little less, talking to people within various, so I went to all the obvious places, the Area 51s. Not that you can go to Area 51, but you can go to the Little Alien, and you can go to the Area 51 UFO Research Center in Roswell and Fort Fest and Clearwater. And one of the wonderful things about that trip, and then we'll move it back to you, is that there were still people who were significant players in the development of UFO belief there's still people who are still alive who haven't gone, but there were people like I got to hang out with John Keel one-on-one, which was incredible. I got to hang out with Jim Moseley one-on-one, which was incredible. Same with Bud Hopkins one-on-one, which was incredible. Lloyd Pye one-on-one, so there's all these people who were forming these belief systems who have now gone, or who were commenting on the belief systems who are now gone. So I've done a lot of holidays and a lot of travels in my life, but there's something special about that trip. But I feel the same thing when I read your book, like when I see you interconnecting with these people, and that let's bring it back to you. What was the story? What was the case file in Midwestern Strange that really grabbed you the most? What was the one that hooked you?
I think about this a lot. It was probably Oscar the Turtle. And again, this is the story of Cherubusco, Indiana in 1949. Allegedly, there was this giant turtle that was spotted in Falk Lake, kind of a small lake, not so many acres, but this giant turtle as big as a dining room table, as big as a VW Beetle. And it had so many witnesses. It got the attention of several major Midwestern papers, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times. I mean, everyone had descended to look for this turtle. And what I love about this story, I mean, a couple things. One is like, it's a big turtle. So like, there's very real possibility that there's just a big turtle around. That's right. But Gail Harris was the farmer who originally saw this turtle. He owned the property, and he kind of made the mistake of telling people he saw a big turtle. So in a small town, I always ask my students, is this true? Because I didn't grow up in a small town, but they agree, like in a small town, your reputation is staked on your reputation. Like if you see a giant turtle, you will forever be the guy who saw the giant turtle. And so at first it was kind of playful and on a lark, and then he began to realize I need to prove this, or everyone's gonna think I'm a liar. So he and some buddies like camped out on this lake several nights throughout this summer of 1949. All these different traps and mechanisms they made to try to trap this turtle. In the end, he drained the lake. He invested bullishly in all this gas and these machines to drain the lake. Didn't find the turtle, and then a huge rainstorm came and just like filled the lake the next day. It was just this tragic thing where this Gail Harris guy, all he wanted was like defend his honor that he saw a giant turtle, and in fact he couldn't prove it. And so here's the crazy twist in the story. He still didn't find it, but A guy named John Gutowski got his PhD here in folklore. He was a professor at Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne, the town of Fort Wayne, where I'm from. And one night he's staying late in the office. He's working on this chapter about Gail Harris. And the janitor walks in to get rid of his trash for him. And the janitor asks, "Oh, what are you working on?" And John just says, "Oh, I'm working on this chapter on Gail Harris. I'm trying to track this guy down." And the janitor goes, "Oh, I'm Gail Harris." He was the janitor, was the guy. It's just, we talk about weird phenomena. Sometimes the world just throws you right what you need. And so he's done a great PhD dissertation on Gail Harris, and he's kind of a Captain Ahab figure. And he gave it all hunting this white whale or slash giant turtle, and he lost. And eventually his reputation was kind of scorned, and he moved away. And it really hindered his life in a real way. So it's a tragic story, but the upside of it is there are still 3 days of Turtle Day festivities every year in a town of 800 who has very little employment opportunity. This is a big opportunity for them to make $10,000 to $15,000, all of which goes right back to their parks and their splash pads and their skate parks. And it's just an incredible community that's for over 50 years has thrived as a result of a turtle maybe no one ever saw.
Wow. Just fascinating. So what? So if that's the, I asked you what the one is which grabbed you the most. What is the one that you think, other than Hodag, which we know is a is a total
Yeah,
hoax,
yeah.
but it's real to the degree that it's like a prank.
Right.
What is the story in here in your wonderful book Midwestern Stranger? What is the one that you think might potentially be the realest, like might be
Yeah.
the closest to what people claim it is?
Great question. Well, I mean, the one we know is real to some extent is this Project Elf, which was this military operation. It's weird because it's odd. Like, why would the military spend millions and millions of dollars putting these underground wires over under like a third of the state of Wisconsin, something bananas like that, all for the purpose of creating this like it's like a beeper system where we would then have a transporter from a tiny town, Clam Lake, Wisconsin, to Republic, Michigan, would then transfer another ding signal to a nuclear sub somewhere in the Atlantic, just to tell them to rise up so that we could give this sub a secret message without the Soviets like knowing what the message was. So I mean, just the amount of infrastructure and time and military bases and millions upon millions of tax dollars, all to relay a signal from a tiny town in Wisconsin to a tiny town in Michigan to a nuclear sub in the ocean. It's just a baffling bit of like curious overreach in terms of military industrial complex. So that's a weird one. But part of that too has to do with feeding weather. Kind of how do we use weather as to weaponize how we fight war? And so there was a giant storm that occurred in the 70s in Wisconsin, a lot of damage, and people said it was because of these extremely low frequency waves, which is what ELF stands for, extremely low frequency, that may have spurred this whole weather outbreak storm in the 70s. So it's just a bizarro one. We know it's true. But also the Minot incident, which I think didn't touch on much, but it had to do with these radar scope photos of a strange aeronautical something or other in the air over this Air Force base. It had a lot of military witnesses. Again, we had radar scope prints with things on there that could not be described. And there's a guy named Tom Tooley, and he spent over a decade of his life finding every detail, interviewing everyone about this UFO sighting. And I was just very impressed with the level of research. I mean, this guy went in deep for a decade. Very curious guy, very much kind of a Mulder type, but was also very skeptical. So I think there's some legs there too. It's kind of a scary topic. Honestly, there's a piece in the book where I mentioned there was a guy named A.R. Underwood. That was his pen name. He was a Wisconsin professor who got into the UFO thing in the 50s. And he called me up one day, or actually I wrote him a letter because he was completely off the grid. He goes, "First of all, how did you find my address?" He was like shocked that anyone found this guy. I found him. And then he said, this UFO stuff, it ruined my career, it ruined my marriage. You better think long and hard before you go down this path. Click. And it was very disturbing. My book's a little more lighthearted, but it kind of made me realize that for a lot of people, this is no joke. This is serious business, and there are real ramifications. So there's a spectrum. We got some lighthearted stuff, we got some heavy stuff. There's something for everyone here.
Have you had any like backlash from doing this?
That's a great question. Some of my other books, yeah, if I write more about like race or some of the more like hot button stuff, I think this one, I've gotten some looks from some colleagues at, faculty meetings. "Oh, how's that UFO book doing for you?" But the reality is people love this book. It's so embarrassing to me, but I sent you the link. I had a little thing on Inside Edition about the Hodag. The thing got over 110,000 views. It's gonna be on my gravestone. I have more views of this stupid Inside Edition thing on the Hodag than like all the readers for all my books combined throughout my lifetime. So it's an odd bedfellows thing. I didn't ever see myself as the guy who would be like the resident scholar on the Hodag briefly. But here we are, and anything that kind of perpetuates the stories or helps these small towns thrive or share their legends. I mean, that's really what it is about for me. It's the human element of these creatures and these phenomenon that really hits home for me.
No, that Inside Edition piece you sent me is great, by the way. It's fantastic.
Silly.
Horace Smith, again, emeritus professor of astronomy and physics, said someday Dean should tell the whole story of his PhD work. Did he get opposition to his topic? Was his thesis committee of different opinions? My thesis committee was amazing. Yes, I did get opposition to my topic, serious opposition, including senior people who did not want me to be able to continue and do it. So that I guess is the nature of academia, though. Do you think you'll revisit the weird again? Is there another weird book in you that you would like to do?
That is a fun thing to think about. I think my litmus test for a book project is, again, like, does it keep me up at night, or do I jump out of bed so anxious to get to the bottom of something? And so when I kind of try to gauge a project, I'm always asking, what materials do I have at my disposal? Why am I the right guy in this geographic location? Like for you, your documentary makes perfect sense. You're the guy for that. No one could do that better, So like, even when Steve and I work on our projects together, my film partner, we're always asking, how are we uniquely suited to tell this story? And so I think if I find myself to stumble upon a strange phenomenon that's either geographically close to me, or it has the interviewees at my disposal, or there's just some X factor that allows me to tell it more uniquely than others, then I think, yeah, I would love to go back down that rabbit hole. But I think I'm waiting for that story to develop still.
Steve's an amazing human being as well. Do you guys have another? Because you did, was it The Rubber Hits the Road was your most
Great
recent?
memory. When Rubber Hit the Road. Yeah, it's actually going to air on PBS Wisconsin next week at this time, May 20th at 8 p.m. We're so excited, and we're working on a new one. It's about the sport of cube. I don't know if you're familiar with cube. It's this very interesting sport. It's kind of a lawn game. It was of Swedish, Norwegian origin. Allegedly, the Vikings played it back in the day with skulls and stuff. Who knows? But now Eau Claire, Wisconsin, is the official national championship home of cube, and so we're kind of following these 4 teams and kind of learning about the friendships and the sport of it all and the history. And so again, that kind of passed the litmus test of we're the right people at the right place to try to tell the story. So that's kind of where we always lean.
I'll be honest, I still haven't still haven't watched the Rub Hits the Road doco. I do need to see. No, I should have come to one of the screenings, because you were theatrical and you were all over the place with that thing.
We were at MyCon all the time. We got to know all the people you get to know. It was really fun. We were there like for 3 weeks straight. Every night we did a little Q&A together. And it was so cool, as you know, to be kind of behind the scenes in a movie theater. It's such a magical experience, so pretty special.
Man, I'm so slack. In fairness, I do live like a 3-hour round trip from the MyCon. I know that's where I do the festival.
Yeah.
For the sake of Horace Smith, a very good friend of mine,
yeah.
Were there weird stories about the Oregon Trail stuff? Is there one you can throw out?
I will throw one, and it's not weird like strange phenomena. It just kind of got me in the gut. So the book is called Go Western Man. Basically, the last day of my son's kindergarten year, we hopped in the car, first day of summer, and retraced the Oregon Trail. For about 2 weeks, we camped out. We went to all the museums. We talked to all the people. But the most powerful moment from that whole trip was when my son, who was 6 years old at the time, we went deep on private land. We had this like farmer guy who just knew the terrain. It was all locked. We were on like thousands of acres with nothing, no cell phone, no humans anywhere. We barely knew this guy. It was kind of nerve-wracking. He took us to this grave of a 6-year-old named Joel Hembry, who died on the Oregon Trail. His head was crushed by a wagon wheel. And it was often the case back then. People died all the time. You buried them. You left within the hour. So there are these grieving parents saying goodbye to their 6-year-old son, and then continued on, never went back. And so here we are with my 6-year-old son. This is probably the only time in history in over 140 years when this guy's been dead, where one 6-year-old was kind of paying his respects to the one who came before. So it was just a really moving thing to be a part of. No one goes this deep into the land. No one goes to visit this grave. And so we had the opportunity to kind of reflect on that moment and what it meant for American history, and kind of for all the people who made it. Many did not, so I think that was maybe a powerful, if not strange, just a powerful moment.
You and Steve Dayton should do a weird paranormal documentary. Have you thought about that, you guys? Or
I would be down. We're always taking ideas. There's not enough hours in the day, but if we find the right story, man, I think we would love to have fun with that. Oh, for sure.
BJ, you were amazing. Like I said, I should have you on far more often on this show to chat. No, I'm serious, man. I could talk
Oh,
to you all
thanks.
night.
Oh, same with you, man. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. So again, Midwestern Strange is one heck of a book. I loved it so much. Can you let people know again how they can get their hands on this?
Absolutely. Well, bjhollars.com is my website, and you have all kinds of links there that get you anywhere you need to go. You can find it pretty easily online and wherever books are sold.
And so BJ Hollars as well to see whatever BJ Hollars, bjhollars.com to see whatever you're up to as well, I'm assuming.
Perfect. You got it.
And again, I can't say how grateful I am that you came to chat with me tonight on Talking Weird, because it was the perfect show. It was weird, and it was Midwest based, and you're a Wisconsin dweller, just as I am. And as we both know, this state is super strange.
Super strange. We'll hang out next year at Weird Fest and we'll chat some more. That's for sure.
Man, we need to hang out before Midwest Weird Fest. I'm going to hunt you
Anytime.
down.
Do it.
So thank you so much for joining me, BJ. It was a great treat chatting to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, everybody.
And I'll be here in the green room after the show for you, BJ, if you want to debrief. But until I talk to you, BJ, later than that, until I talk to you, everybody else out there, please do keep it weird.